Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this critical infrastructure fireside chat with Rob Lee. I am Dr. Arun Lakhotia. I'm professor of computer science at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, and I'm the director of the Center for Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity. South Louisiana has a very high density of critical infrastructure. And as you're aware, the I-10 corridor is lined with petrochemical companies. And just south of that corridor, we have a string of pearls, in this case, the ports in Louisiana. So we serve the nation, a good part of South Northeast. They're heating gas. That's how they stay warm in winter. And of course, we also serve the nation with all of the supplies that come from South America. So we're a critical, Louisiana is a critical component in the overall supply chain of the country. And as you would have seen, and you can guess from the kind of attack that happened on the recent attack on the pipeline company, Colonial, any attack on any of our infrastructure could have similar impact on the rest of the country. So given the significance of critical infrastructure to the economy of Louisiana and of course the nation, UL Lafayette created CCIC, the Center for Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity, to do research in the space. We are in this sort of tail end of the October Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And in this month, CCIC has taken the lead to create some conversation within our community on critical infrastructure protection. I had the benefit of having met Rob not too long back in another webinar. I invited him for this conversation. But before I go far with Rob's conversation, I'd like to introduce our sponsor who have helped put this event together. So I'd like to start off with Jim Williams. Jim?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jim Williams. I'm the Public-Private Partnership Officer with the Louisiana Business Emergency Operations Center. We're here to help your businesses, whether it be a natural disaster or a man-made disaster. The BOC is here to help. Thank you, Dr. Arun.
Thank you. Randy?
Hi, I'm Randy Gray. I'm the Chief Information Officer for Lafayette Consolidated Government, and we are a co-sponsor of this event. It's very important for all of us to work together as a community to combat cyber threats, and a lot of that comes with awareness and education. So glad to be a part of it.
Thank you. Heidi?
Good afternoon. I'm Heidi Malasa, and I'm the director of the Small Business Development Center based here at UL Lafayette. We're part of a nationwide entrepreneurial and technical assistance program that provides counseling and training to existing businesses and those starting up. But of course, we do concentrate on capitalization, business plan development, and we do support our funder SBA with disaster recovery, preparedness, and of course, today's cybersecurity.
Thank you. Matt? Matt, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Arun. I'm Matt Delcom. I'm Director of University Computing and the Deputy CIO for UL Lafayette. We're a partner to many of the organizations that are under the university envelope. And as you would expect, with 3,500 employees and 20,000 students who are pseudo workers, cybersecurity awareness and approach is key to our business.
Yes, Cynthia? Cynthia with PTAC, if you're speaking, maybe your mic is not on. Your mic is not on, Cynthia.
All right, now is it?
That's good.
Okay, good, good. So I'm Cindy Carrier. I'm the program manager with Louisiana Procurement Technical Assistance Center, and we too are housed at University of Louisiana at Lafayette. And what we do is assist Louisiana-based businesses with all things government contract related. That's local government, state of Louisiana, and then any other state that you want to do business in, and then local governments like parishes, counties, school boards, cities, that kind of thing. So our funding comes from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, the state of Louisiana through LED, and Department of Defense through DLA, but we just got transferred over to DOD. So now we're under DOD. We're a statewide program, and all our assistance is completely free to any Louisiana-based business. One of the most basic things that we do is you can go to the next slide. One of the most basic things that we do is we put your company on our database and we start pulling from 3,500 websites that are all government related, and we send you daily government bid leads. And then we assist you if we send you one that you're interested in bidding on, or you find through your own marketing efforts. So we help with bid and proposal preparations, all the mandatory registrations that your company has to take care of, any beneficial certifications for set aside federal government contracts. And then you can see all the other things we get involved in. A big one is target marketing, who at the government buys what it is that your company provides. We can get involved in contract negotiation, which is kind of my favorite part of assistance with our companies. That means that you have been selected, but you're entering in negotiations now for the best price. We assist with SBIR and STTR. In fact, I just did a 3-hour training session on that with our PTAC companies. And then today, this training event is all about cybersecurity, and we get involved with that, specifically with the CMMC certification that you're going to have if that clause is in your contract. It's a DFARS clause. You'll see it. It has to do with cybersecurity, and you have to be certified to a certain level for your company, either level 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And next slide, I just want to give you our contact information. So if you're not a PTAC client already and you want to take advantage and get us to assist you with all your government contracting endeavors and pursuits, just call this 800 number or the website. You'll see a client intake form. It's really simple and fast. It's just your basic company information, and then a PTAC counselor will contact you directly. And then you have my contact information there as well. Thanks so much for joining us today and letting us co-sponsor with everyone.
Thank you. And I'd like to have the next and the last sponsor, Lester Military. I'm not sure if Lester is here to talk about InfraGuard, but Alan Rourke, would you want to speak?
Yeah, this is Alan Roark. Lester's working on his house. His home and their office got damaged during Hurricane Ida. But I'm also an employee of the Plexos Group based out of Baton Rouge. And we're working with the U.S. Department of Homeland, Housing, Urban Development, easy for everybody else to say. But we're doing reimbursements for FEMA for for hospitals, nursing homes, assisted living facilities to help them recover the money that they've spent on COVID-19 reimbursements. And we just signed a contract with HUD, so I've got to get another ID with DHS for that. And sorry, Lester couldn't make it, but most of y'all know him anyway. He's a great guy. Thank you.
Okay, thanks to our sponsors. And so now a few housekeeping notes. For communication, if you'd like to reach out and you have a question, I recommend if you send a chat, and one of us would be monitoring the chat and bring the question to the attention of the moderator. Now, if you may, to conserve bandwidth and stability of the connection, please keep your camera off and microphone muted during the presentation. And so we would have, well, this would be a conversation. So you would have most of the time will be for question and answer. So with that, I want to introduce to you Rob Lee, and also that mention that Jim Williams, whom you've just met, would be the moderator for this conversation. So let me see what has got me really excited to have invite Rob for this presentation, this conversation, I would like to say. So Rob Lee is a recognized pioneer in the industrial security response and threat intelligence community. So I got to hear him speak in a meeting of let's say DOD and Department of Defense and Department of Energy gathering on analysis of malware threat. And so I happened to meet him there, and I learned about him. So he gained his start in security as a U.S. Air Force cyber warfare operations officer, tasked to the National Security Agency, where he built a first of its kind mission identifying and analyzing national threats to industrial infrastructure. He went on to build industrial community's first dedicated monitoring and incident response class at SANS Institute. And this is, I think, class ICS 515, and the industry recognized cyber threat intelligence course for FOR 578. Forbes named Robert to its 30 under 30 in 2016 list as one of the brightest entrepreneurs, breakout talent, and change agent in enterprise technology. There's a lot I could speak about Rob, but one of the key important part is also started, he's an entrepreneur. He's a CEO and founder of Dragos, a company that is leading is a leader in response to threat intelligence for critical infrastructure protection. So with that, I want to turn over to Rob and Jim. And one thing I learned from Rob is he doesn't want to do PowerPoint, death by PowerPoint. So you're gonna listen to him, so you're gonna see him and listen to him speak. With that, Jim and Rob.
Thanks for that. Perfect. So Jim, did you want to start off with anything, or do you want me to maybe just do a preamble on kind of what's been going on in industrial recently?
No, it turned it over to you, sir.
All right, perfect. All right, well, thanks everybody for joining me today and joining for this group. And there is a lot going on in the world of industrial cybersecurity these days. And I think maybe just to start the conversation, and I was hoping it would just be more of a Q&A session with folks. But to start the conversation, maybe I can give you a kind of where have we been and why are we here kind of feel to this. Because if you're kind of dialing in these days to operations technology or OT, or kind of this discussion of industrial systems, it seems like a lot's happening and real quickly. And what I mean by that is there's White House level proclamations coming out, right? So the president signed the ICS, so Industrial Control Systems National Security Memorandum. There's these 100-day action plans with various sectors. TSA just put regulations on the pipeline sector. They're talking about doing aviation and rail and potentially maritime after that. There's a lot happening all of at once, all focused around this topic of OT, right? That operations technology. And most of the CEOs and folks I meet with these days, it's the first question out their mouth, like, what is going on? Like, why now? Like, what is there some huge risk that we are missing? Is there some classified threat or something that got us here? And so maybe we can just set the stage with where people thought they were before and why we're seeing this. So the topic of critical infrastructure protection is not new, right? And I'm sure you all have lived through this where I think the first time publicly it was discussed about cyber attacks on critical infrastructure in a policy directive was in 1998, right? So 1998, President Clinton published Presidential Directive 63, which was all around critical infrastructure, cyber protection. It started talking about the sector-specific agencies and FBI and DHS eventually, and FBI has also gotten into InfraGard and so forth. And so there's a whole lot of discussions of, hey, private sector, y'all own and operate infrastructure, but that infrastructure is critical infrastructure for us. It's got national security risks, and you can make business risks all day long and figure out what you're going to do for business risk. But you as a power company or an oil company or a manufacturer can't make national security risks decisions. So you've got to solve the national security risk by putting a base level of cybersecurity in place. Anything above that is kind of on you on business risk. And so that got a lot of folks talking. And if you're a CEO or board member or policymaker, you're looking at this going, dude, we've talked about critical infrastructure protection for 20 something years now. We've been making investments for 20 plus years into this. What's now, what's new, et cetera. Well, what had happened back in the early 2000s is as companies told their staffs to protect their infrastructure, the IT security staffs, the enterprise security staffs generally would go to the plant managers, the VP of operations, the operations and engineering side of the house and say, hey, we're supposed to help you with cybersecurity. What do you need? What's going on? What's the mission? What are we doing? And a lot of the time in most companies, and it wasn't bad, it wasn't wrong, it wasn't malicious, but most companies, the operations side of the house said, no, we're good. We're disconnected. We're air gapped. We're not connected to the internet. We're not connected to the enterprise. There's no cyber risk here. Go protect your side of the house. Stay out of ours. Sometimes that was true. Sometimes it was well-intentioned, regardless if it was true or not. They just didn't know. And sometimes it was defensive because IT security controls and well-intentioned IT people have brought down more power plants in the United States than Russia, China, and Iran combined. Some mistakes and patching and stuff that you got to be careful of in operations have caused real resilience issues. And so sometimes it was defensive. Well, why don't you just stay in IT? So kind of this IT OT, if you will, divide took place in most companies. But at the board and the CEO level, it was always getting reported up. Oh, look at what we're doing. Look at our metrics. Look at our insights. Here's our patch rates. Here's our detection rates. Look at all this magic. And so for a long, long time, CEOs and board members, and by virtue, the policymakers thought, well, look at all this amazing stuff we're doing. We got all this goodness. That's great. Now, if people believed they were separated or segmented or air gapped or whatever, that died at least 10 years ago. It has not existed for 10 plus years. And we routinely walk into plants today where people are like, oh yeah, we're air gapped. And like, no, you're not. And like one look at the network, like not even close. So it's still out there that people believe it, but it's not true. It hasn't been true for at least 10 years. And the reality is a lot of these networks have been getting connected up to vendors and integrators and service providers and the GEs and Honeywells of the world doing good work and helping people out. But that has increased its attack surface. And as you create that connectivity, as you create those access paths, adversaries can take advantage of that. And so again, at a policy level, it wasn't a we're done and we're good. There's always concern, but it was kind of the, hey, mission accomplished. We've been talking about this and the sector's been responding and we're okay. But then what happened that I think really started changing the discussion dates back to 2015. In 2015, the first ever cyber attack to take down electric power happened in Ukraine in December. I got to lead the investigation. It was an interesting case. And yeah, first time ever power outage due to a cyber attack. And what was interesting about that is DOE and Department of Defense and policymakers all got out in public in the United States throughout 2016 and not lying and not maliciously said, don't worry, American public, don't worry, folks, that can't happen here. Yeah, that can happen in Ukraine, but that's because they're not taking security seriously. And heck, we've got standards and frameworks and regulations and investments that can't happen here. And the power companies really showed a lot of maturity by saying, well, hold on now, what do you mean that can't happen here? And they talked to their counterparts in government and so forth. I was in a lot of these conversations. And government officials go, no, we look at all the security efforts we're doing. Like, what? No, that's on the enterprise side. Like, what do you mean enterprise? Well, that's on the IT stuff. That's not on our substations, our power generation sites, our pipelines. It's not on the OT side. We haven't largely done anything on the OT side besides maybe firewalls and segmentation. And there was this massive holy crap moment for a lot of policymakers on, you mean you've only been investing in the enterprise cybersecurity side of your house? Now, that's not true for every company, but for the large majority of the community. You've only been investing on your enterprise IT side of the house, but what makes you critical infrastructure is the services and goods you provide, which come out of OT. So if you were going to do one, we would have referred you to the other one, but what do you mean you're just doing one? At the same time, you had a lot of ransomware cases started happening in 2016, 2017. It's gotten bad recently, but it's been happening for a while. And a lot of these boards and these CEOs, when their company gets crippled and stays out of the media, but still gets crippled, and they're going, I thought we were good. Oh, no. All the slides we showed you, all the metrics we showed you was for IT, not OT. No CEO ever went to the company and said, reduce cyber risk on the enterprise. They said, reduce cyber risk. Our company, reduce cyber risk, not IT or OT. So you have this big kind of wake up moment starting in early 2016. Then in the end of 2016, it was the second ever cyber attack on electric power that took place. Then in 2017, you had the first ever cyber attack on a petrochemical facility where people tried to kill people. They targeted safety system in a petrochemical environment and intentionally tried to kill people at that site through a cyber attack. 2018 and 2019, you had something like 15 new state actors get identified targeting industrial systems across the world. 2020, you had SolarWinds, and that one scared the hell out of the policy community, because SolarWinds and the compromise that took place with SolarWinds was interesting on the IT side. Yep, okay, fine, whatever. What's not very public is there was a number of those integrators and OEMs, the original equipment manufacturers and vendors, that were compromised with the compromised version of SolarWinds, and they had direct access through maintenance links and VPNs and all sorts of stuff to critical infrastructure sites at the control level. So the Russian state group that conducted the SolarWinds operation, whether or not they intended to, had remote direct access to hundreds of sites at their critical locations, including like gas turbine software. That scared a lot of people. But what scared people more is after we knew what it looked like. It's SolarWinds. It's this version of SolarWinds. It's these communications on the networks to look for. When we knew exactly what to look for after we knew what the problem was, and you went out to companies and said, can you tell us if you have this? Most of the infrastructure companies couldn't. And so they couldn't detect and respond to the things that we even knew about. Forget the unknown unknowns, just the stuff that we knew about. And it made them look incompetent. It made them look like, what the hell? What have you been doing? Like I've testified to Congress and the Senate a couple of times now. And in those discussions, you have to like calm down the room. We've told them this is important. Are they not paying attention? Are they not listening? Do they not take national security seriously? And you have to push back. Hold on now. If you look at the standards and the frameworks and the regulations we put in place, it's largely IT. And even when it was OT-ish, it was very preventative and focused. Firewalls, antivirus, patching, passwords. We didn't tell them to do a lot of detection and response. So the problem isn't that the infrastructure owners and operators are incompetent. It's that they're listening. And the guidance has been 95% preventative and mostly IT. So don't be surprised when they didn't invest a lot in detection and response or whatever else in OT, because they were listening to the government. And so long story short, executives, board members, policymakers across a couple-year period culminating with SolarWinds really finally understood the nuance of the discussion between IT and OT to realize that they hadn't invested a lot or invested in the level they needed to in the areas they needed to on the OT side of the house. And so we're seeing a pendulum swing from a policy perspective with a lot of focus on these industrial systems. And some of it can be good, and some of it I have some concerns with. We saw the White House reach out to the electric sector. This was referenced in the National Security Memorandum that came out. And the White House directly engaged with the CEOs of the power sector. 80% of the power company CEOs in the United States belong to the Electric Sector Coordinating Council. It has DHS, DOE, and the CEOs. And the White House went there, spoke to them, said, hey, we're going to tell you why we're concerned. Here's what we're seeing. Here's the threats we're seeing. Here's the issues. This is why. We're going to tell you what we want you to do about it. We want you to get better detection and response capabilities specifically in your OT. And beyond that, we want you to invest more in security in your OT. Okay, not just wherever you want to do cyber, but the OT is the gap. But they said, how you do it is up to you. We're not going to prescribe the answer to you. You're the infrastructure owner and operator. You know your system better than us. However you want to accomplish the goal is up to you. So here's the why, here's the what, we'll stay out of the how. And in a 100-day sprint, so that 100-day period they had that, 155 utilities across the country moved. They decided, they went out and picked their answers and picked what they wanted to do, deploy technologies and so forth in the utility networks. We had 0% monitoring capability across OT in the electric system at the start of the year. And that was being shared back to the government. And by the end of the 100-day period, we have 70% of the electric sector by meter is being monitored and shared those insights of what threats and vulnerabilities are being seen directly to the government. That is phenomenal. That was because government said why and what and stayed out of how. And the counter side, you see what's going on with TSA. And I think there's a lot of good people at TSA, and I think they were definitely pressured to move quickly on the back end of Colonial and the public discussion of it. But they did the exact opposite. They said, we're not going to tell you why we're concerned. It's classified. And we're not going to tell you what outcome we're trying to achieve, but we are going to tell you how. And so the Security Directive 2 is extraordinarily prescriptive and steps through exactly what you have to do for security controls. And let's say you find a vulnerability. There might be 6 or 7 different things to mitigate the risk of vulnerability. They were prescribing, no, you will do this one instead. And so it took a lot of the optionality out of the infrastructure owners and operators' hands. And if you actually follow the TSA Security Directive 2 guidance to its completion, you will bring down a pipeline. You cannot do all that they're asking you to do across all the systems that relate to pipeline operations and maintain a resilient pipeline. So you got a lot of pipeline owners and operators that want to partner with the government, want to do the right thing, want to take national security seriously, but they're in a rock and a hard place of some of the guidance is just honestly bad. And again, it kind of gives you a juxtaposition of the why and the what, stay out of the how versus the no why, no what, and we'll tell you the how. And I think very clearly we can make a case on which one works. But for setting the stage on what the hell is going on, what are we seeing, why are people freaking out, why such a topic on OT now, hopefully that gives some insight on the conversation has changed. Many of the folks that are not security practitioners are finding out the differences between IT and OT, realizing that we haven't done all the things in OT that we probably should have been doing, and that there's unrealized business risk and unrealized national security risk. And so there's a hurry up and go aspect to addressing it. And we just need to make sure we're thoughtful in the community on that, because knee-jerk reactions don't lead to good policy and they don't lead to good action. But if we can have a conversation and time and so forth, we can absolutely solve this, because our infrastructure owners and operators have consistently shown that they're willing to step up to the plate and play ball. They've consistently shown that they take national security interests seriously and their responsibility as a critical infrastructure owner and operator seriously. But we got to give them the right guidance. We got to make sure we are approaching it the right way. So there's information and sharing and comment periods and so forth. So anyways, look, I'm happy to dig into any of the cases you're interested in, what we're seeing in ransomware, what we're seeing in, cyber attacks and infrastructure, vulnerabilities, whatever you'd like to dig into. I'll also talk about some of those policy things that are happening now, what to expect in the other industries. But hopefully that was just enough to get us kicked off with some questions. If you all don't have questions, this is going to be a real boring time period. So nothing is off limits, but it's got to be interesting. So we'll hopefully have some fun. But Jim, over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Great background, Rob, and for somebody who has not been knee deep in this field as you are, that was very informative. So what I'd like to do right now is give everybody a chance to ask some questions here. We have something from Robert. And 171 requirements for incident response or similarities to EO 14028. You want to talk that one?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so CMMC is essentially a standard that's being put out, could move into some kind of quote unquote governance regulation kind of discussion, but security standard put out. And it was largely intended at first for those doing business with the federal government, really focused on the defense industrial base. So where the government was coming from, and largely the Department of Defense was coming from on CMMC, was putting together an argument that a lot of our national security risk is housed in small suppliers. And there's some shops out there that maybe they got 10 people on staff, but they might make a real critical component of an F-35 jet. and that real critical component is getting rolled into something that Boeing and Raytheon and others are using. But we see adversaries compromising that 10-person shop. And that 10-person shop is getting compromised by our strategic adversaries. Intellectual property is getting stolen, radar plans, whatever else interesting stuff. And it's kind of hard to expect that 10-person shop to be in a good place. And so CMMC, in its original design, was around saying, hey, what are just some base level standards that have got to happen? And they're going to be requirements to do business in the defense industrial base with the federal government. And in many ways, it's kind of a tax, but it's kind of a good tax, where if one vendor is competing against another vendor to be a subcontractor on a contract to provide some interesting, paint for the F-35 or the B-2 or whatever, they shouldn't be able to cut corners on cybersecurity to be able to underbid their competitor. So by having kind of this bar that you all have to do at least these things in CMMC, and that cost is kind of baked in, everybody has to do that. Then you compete on contracting and pricing proposals after that. And so in many ways, it's actually kind of it's an okay approach. And in CMMC and 171 and EO 14028, there's lots of discussions around cyber incident response and cyber information reporting and sharing. And the intention behind it is good. And so the question is, what are the benefits of cyber incident reporting and information sharing for these infrastructures? So the intent is really fair. The intent is, if a company in Lafayette gets hit with an attack from China, shouldn't the DHS know so that it can determine if there's a wider issue and then also inform the company in Santa Monica? Shouldn't, in other words, an attack on one of us be an attack on all of us? And we all share those insights. So the intent behind that's really good. And there's an intent as it relates to ransomware, where when you pay the ransom, that ransomware group is getting more fuel for the fire to go target other people. And so as a barrier to paying the ransom, we're not saying you're not allowed to, but as a barrier of it, you at least got to report that you did. And that might change some of the conversation on whether a company is willing to pay the ransom or not. And at the very minimum, we know the scope of the problem in the government. I can understand how many of our citizens and infrastructure companies are getting ransomed by foreign actors, and that might drive different policy outcomes and shape those behaviors. So again, the intent is really good. I am not as optimistic about it as maybe some of my peers. One of the things that I'm concerned about, actually, I'll get to the mechanics of it. I'm very concerned about the mechanics. I'm going to come back to that because that gets into a little bit of a nuanced discussion. But I'm a little bit concerned on the value back to the community. And what I mean by that is, if we tell the asset owners, you need to report these things under federal law or the restrictions of fines or regulations, and then you don't provide value back, you're going to get a very cynical, very jaded infrastructure community very quickly. In other words, if we all start contributing food items to the potluck and we all get fed, I don't think anybody's going to complain. But if you start having to do everything around these requirements, like the reporting and the information sharing, but you don't get anything back, I think we're setting ourselves up for failure, where there's a lot of trust lost in those government entities. And what I've consistently seen in my time in government and out of government is it's very difficult for the government to communicate quickly about the things it sees, because some of the information it uses might be classified, but sometimes, and this is even the worst problem, most of it's not classified. There's no magic behind the curtain. Most of the times it's just classified environments, and even have discussions about something gets classified. And so it's an overclassification issue where you could be reading something in CNN and get called into an FBI briefing 3 weeks later to get told it at a classified level. And you're like, dude, I just saw this in CNN. Like, why are we having this conversation? So I don't know that the government has put in place an understanding of their roles and responsibilities to the level that facilitates what they're going to do with all this information when they get it. And if they're not able to show value back to the community, I fear that there will be some animosity on, what did you make us jump through these hoops for? So I'm a little bit concerned about that. Now, the mechanics of it are even more concerning, where nobody is properly defining scope and nobody's properly defining what kind of incidents matter. So if you look at the one of the incident reporting bills, they try to do that, but they say, hey, if you're in critical infrastructure, this applies to you. And if it relates to state adversaries, ransomware, transatlantic criminal nature or transcontinental criminal nature, or APTs, advanced persistent threats. Any of those, you got to report your incident. Well, and you got to do it within 24 hours. Well, the problem is most people don't know if it's one of those things in the first 24 hours at all. Like the first 24 hours of an incident are hectic at best. And that's not really the definition of an incident. That's just the definition of who's involved in the incident. So what is an incident? Did somebody install malware on your system? Is that an incident? But what if you blocked it? Is it an incident if the adversary got access and stole data? Is it an incident if they just got access? Is it an incident if they scanned your systems? Is it an incident if they accessed your website? Like, what is in scope and what is not is very poorly defined. And I think that's going to cause a ton of confusion. And further, if you're in critical infrastructure, that's already a broad topic about who is and isn't critical infrastructure. I don't think we've really defined that outside of like the 16 sector specific agencies discussion. But more importantly, let's take Southern Company. Southern Company is a phenomenal electric company, and they do really good work. And they've got Southern Company, the holdings company, that's all enterprise IT networks, can't impact a single power system. They've got Southern Alabama, or Alabama Southern, they got Mississippi Southern, right? And so they've got the power companies underneath them, and they have their IT networks, but then they have their OT networks. Some of the stuff they have in Alabama Power is pretty critical. Some of the systems are distribution level substations that aren't really critical. And if you lost one, it's not a national security issue. But they also got HR systems that can't impact power at all. Should they have to report on every incident related to all those systems, or only incidents that could impact what makes them critical infrastructure? And that's not defined. So not to try to go too far in the rabbit hole, I would just say there's a lot of open-ended questions on what is the scope of these things and what matters to the government and what doesn't, and what is the government going to do with all this information? And all three of those are left undefined. And I would hope that they get figured out before we're pushing standards and regulations onto the community. So yeah, Jim, do you just want me to jump to the next question and read it out?
Yeah, that's perfect. You can go to Neil's question about percentages.
Awesome. So question for everybody, just in case you got folks dial in, is what's the percentage breakdown of breaches caused by criminal groups versus nation states? Also, is there a major difference in targets for both groups? Examples might be that a nation state would go after large utilities, or maybe a criminal will go after smaller, easier targets. Great. So I don't say that there's a specific percentage. So this is just a rough, very hand wavy number. But I would say like 60 to 70% of your breaches tend to be criminal in nature. And it's really the 30 to 40 that's those state actors. And there was a pretty clear delineation that things that were more financial motivation in nature, stealing credit card information, ransomware, things like that, were criminal. And things that were stealing espionage and disrupting a power plant and things like that were state. And it used to be that way up until probably 5-6 years ago. And then we started seeing some pretty persistent changes where some of the state groups like North Korea, sure, they do destructive operations, but at night they're also running, criminal operations off of their infrastructure to finance their operations. See this with Russian-based groups all the time. Sometimes you see some Chinese teams do industrial espionage and then moonlight in the evening and do credit card rackets or online gaming stuff. And so these lines started blurring pretty significantly. And some of the state actors who were really good state actors and really good operators and hackers, if you will, though that there's nothing wrong with hacking, but these state operators, they left the state, they left the government, and then they went into private sector. But in their private sector, they're spinning up mercenary kind of companies and hacker for hire groups and similar. And so the lines blurred drastically on what is and isn't state activity. And so what we can say is that a significant portion of the breaches we see have a financial motivation. Some of that is state, some of that is criminal, but it's a lot of things are financial motivated, probably the 60%. About 40% of them are the going after to do reconnaissance, to get access, future military operations, espionage, things like that. And so that's generally the breakdown. And the discussion of targeting is actually a really interesting one because sometimes it's the exact opposite. And so there is no hard and fast rule there, where we've seen very good state actors target small water, small electric cooperatives and municipalities. We've seen them target big ones. And while we can't say with confidence why, and we can't get to the intent of what the adversary was doing. But what is fairly clear is that when you're targeting OT, you may not be able to stand up a power grid or a pipeline in your basement to go train. So getting access to smaller infrastructure sites still has a very good state motivation of providing a laboratory and training and range and environment for your operators before they go after the big targets. So we tend to see that on state actors, there ends up being a motivation to learn more and be positioned to do things in the future. And with the ones that tend to be more criminal in nature, we tend to see opportunistic of wherever they can get access, they'll go. Sometimes it's big, sometimes it's small, but if they can get access, they're going to go and do their financial motivation crime. A lot of times human operated ransomware these days, and it's extremely effective. Perfect. So the next one, when looking at CMMC scoping for OT environments, does the Purdue model segmentation assist organizations in defining assessment scope, information systems, potential CUI within control environments, environments under contract, et cetera? So the Purdue model is, the short answer is no, because the Purdue model was never really meant to be a network architecture. A lot of information security people use it that way. But the Purdue model is actually meant to be a time-based architecture. So level 0 would be microseconds, and we're talking real-time physics. Level 1 would be milliseconds, not real time, but milliseconds. We're okay. Level 2, okay, we could deal with a second or two of communication lag. Level 3, couple seconds, 10 seconds, hell, even a minute's probably not that big of a deal. And so it was a time-based reference. But that naturally fit to sensors and actuators and physics, level 0, control systems that are doing computation, level 1. It kind of put things into a classification based on the type of assets that existed when the model was created. And a lot of security professionals looked at it and go, aha, level 0 shouldn't talk to level 1 and level 1 shouldn't talk to level 2. And they've used it as like a DMZ kind of reference architecture. So using Purdue model as a segmentation and a strategy on architecture doesn't really fit the real world. I don't know that it ever really has. And so CMMC is not really leveraging that for OT. Actually, right now, I think the open concern with the CMMC is it doesn't pay a whole lot of attention to the difference between an OT and an IT environment. And while it tries to call it out a little bit, there's a lot of like IT security controls that are getting copy and pasted into the OT security portfolio, which is adding additional costs and risk without necessarily reducing any of the cyber risk. So I think CMMC, from the conversations I've seen, is very lacking in the OT portion, but there are open discussions to try to move that along. All right, so we got one here. I've noticed that there are a lot of IoT routing devices, such as 4G hotspots, that are by default exposed to the internet. You can find them on websites like Shodan. Things like with default credentials and so forth. Given that around 82% of people don't change default credentials, how big of a problem do you believe this is, given that people who tend to work on OT also tend to use these devices? Do you believe laws such as the California law preventing devices shipping with default credentials are a solution? Additionally, how do you monitor IoT device logs that don't necessarily natively support that? Great question. So I'm going to break the question into kind of two parts, or I'm going to break the conversation, I should say, into two parts. Just for terminology clarification. This is me being pedantic, and I'm not so sure it matters, but for my own basis here, I'll talk about the difference between IoT and the difference between IIoT. So in the world of IT, right, information technology, we've got IoT, Alexa, camera systems, things like that. In the world of OT, we have industrial Internet of Things, which is like sensors and actuators and robot arms that now have IP addresses and networking, right? So it's the stuff that we've had for a while, but now it has networking capabilities. And when we look at the IIoT popping up in OT, things like passwords and that don't really matter at all. Actually, a lot of the things that people look at an OT environment and go, oh my gosh, they tend not to matter. You might walk into a pipeline and go, oh my gosh, it's Windows XP. Why do they still have old, outdated legacy systems and there's a default password? So the risk isn't in product security. Product security is not the same thing as OT security. OT security is how does the system of systems interact to house an output with physics? Can I operate the engineering system in such a way that I change logic on a controller in such a way that I cause an overpressure event in a pipeline? That's concerning. That generally has nothing to do with vulnerabilities and exploits of those systems. There's a lot of talk about it, but there's not been one known vulnerability ever used in any successful ICS cyber attack that's caused any level of disruption or destruction or anything like that. So just thinking about the IT security challenges and copy and pasting into OT, it can be misleading on the problem we're trying to solve. So at the IIoT discussion, what I care about is where do they give access? How are they allowing connectivity into the plant? What could I do from that system 1 to impact system 2 to impact system 3? And it's not so much a credential or operating system or vulnerability discussion. It's a kind of a what's the inherent trust and native functionality of that system and who can access it and where. So your comment about like finding an Shodan as an example is a great example of the risk. If I can bypass all of your security defenses to just go through a back door by accessing an IoT device that you've put into a manufacturing facility, that opens up significant risk. Under the IoT discussion, that's where I do think credentials matter and the California laws and similar are very interesting. And I think we can go back to comments I made about the CMMC, like tax, and look at it the same way. Right now, if you're a camera producer or an IoT smart, smart doorbell or something system, you're operating in a manufacturing industry where the margins are pennies. Like profit margins of pennies matter per device when you're talking about mass producing consumer goods. When you're mass producing consumer goods and pennies make the difference, what's the first thing to leave? Security. So the first thing that people cut out is the security of those devices and product security and vulnerabilities and passwords and things like that. They cut out the security stuff because they're trying to race to market on penny margins to put out a product for people. And the problem I have with that is there's still a cost. But now that cost is getting passed to society. There's a societal cost of manufacturer 1 no longer has to pay for the security in that smart doorbell system. But now when there's compromises or hacks or they form into a botnet and they're taking down the website of a hospital that can now not operate correctly because their infrastructure is getting denied service, like those type of things have a societal impact. And that cost is still getting borne, but it's just getting transferred. That cost is getting hidden and transferred to the American public. And I have a problem with that. So I'm not a huge fan of like regulations in general. I'm not a huge fan in just trying to pretend we can regulate security because sometimes I don't even know what security relates to. But for some of these issues in some markets, like a consumer market where we have IoT devices, providing some Energy Star like rating of, hey, there's a couple basic things you got to be able to do: consistent logging, be able to change the password, know that you can actually provide an update if something happens, because some systems you can't even update. There's some like basics that we could put in to say everybody that sells to the market has to be able to meet this level. And that provides the same economic incentive and cost to everybody to make an even playing field. So I'm generally not very pro legislation and regulation and similar, unless you're talking about creating a fair marketplace. And when you're doing things that create a fair marketplace, I think that's a good source of discussion. So that's one that could be taking place there. On OT and IoT, I wouldn't go that direction. Let's see, somewhat of a continuation of the previous question. While we have a decent understanding of securing our IT platforms, it appears that we have a severe gap in industrial controls, many of which were deployed a decade ago or more, don't have cyber protection as a base requirement. Many deployments, there's thousands of different controls. Any thoughts on specific approaches and how we attempt to address the industrial security challenge? Yep, great question. So the first thing we have to do, the first thing we have to agree on here, and so it sounds like I may have addressed some of it, so I'll make it quick. And the first thing we have to agree on is what is the problem? Too often, security professionals and technologists want to jump in with, you should use AI, or you should use blockchain, or you should use this, or you should use that, or whatever the flavor of the day is. And we can't be prescriptive around the answer when we don't know the problem. So the real question is, what are we trying to solve for? What's the problem? What was the requirement? Then we can move into, well, what's the best answer? And the requirement and the challenge that we're solving for in OT is different than in IT. And I went back to that like systems to systems discussion and what we're trying to solve for. So we should look at the scenarios that drive risk, the scenarios that can cause societal harm, the scenarios that can cause power outages, pipeline outages, that look at the actual challenges, then think about what does it take to solve those, and then put in the security controls. And if you do that, from my point of view, in all the cases we've worked, you really get to like 5 controls. You might do 30 or 40 things in enterprise IT security, but there's like 5 that really matter in OT. First one is have a defensible architecture. I don't really care what that means to you. Is it microsegmentations? Is it firewalls? Is it diodes? Is it DMZs? Doesn't matter. You need a defensible architecture. The characteristics of a defensible architecture means that I can put humans into it to do security, and it becomes a defended architecture, right? So defensible is not secure, it's not defended. You add the human to make it defended, but I can have something that the infrastructure supports the security work that I want to be able to do with some base level of preventative capabilities in it. In other words, you can't just access the control system from the internet, right? So some level of defensible architecture. Number two is monitoring. When it's a systems of systems challenge, I don't care so much about antivirus and endpoint protection and things like that. I care about understanding the network and how system one interacts with system two and how those communications look. And with monitoring, I can identify the assets and the inventory I have to know if they're contained in the defensible architecture. I can detect threats, I can detect vulnerabilities. You can do a lot in monitoring at the network level. Number three is a key vulnerability management program. 90 something percent of the vulnerabilities, I think it's 93% of our last research of the vulnerabilities in ICS don't really matter. Only about 7% really actually matter. And so what are those 7% and can we fix them, right? So key vulnerability management. Don't pretend that patching every vulnerability is worthwhile. Number four is a tailored incident response plan. You're going to need to have ICS security experts, people that understand the operations that are involved in an incident response on the plant level. You can't take your enterprise approach and just think you're going to be okay at an incident response. And number five is actually one that's very similar in IT, which is a multi-factor authentication. Now, I will say access control of where you do have remote access, how are they accessing and design a secure solution. But the leading one in the market now, based on our current security posture, is multi-factor authentication. So wherever possible, deploying multi-factor authentication for that remote access, it's going to drop the risk significantly. You do those 5 things consistently across your operations environment, and you've got a world-class OT security system. But if you look at the regulations and frameworks and things that we're throwing at people, we're not telling them to do those things, or we're telling them to do those things in like 30 other controls. And that's why we need to understand the problem before being too prescriptive. Next question is, where are the largest skill gaps in the US on OT security? Example, is there not enough employees at asset owners both knowledgeable about IT and OT? Is there not enough OT security consultants? Is there not enough engineers? And so I'm going to give you the really bad answer to say yes. There is a significant skills gap in general on OT security, and it is across all elements of the problem. However, when we talk about OT, when we talk about cybersecurity skills gap, we also have to have an honest conversation about the market versus what people experience. So I see these numbers all the time. There's 800, I don't know what it is, 8 million, 800,000, I don't know, some large number of like, there's not enough people in the workforce and look at how many open jobs there are. And we have a skills gap in this country. And I believe we do, but I also believe we're exaggerating the hell out of the problem. Because the way those numbers are generated is they look at the open jobs at various companies, and then they tally how many of the jobs stay open, and that gets you your gap. And that's not actually a real number for a couple of reasons, duplicates and whatever else. But the real problem is you'll see like, hey, I want an entry-level security person that has 10 years of experience in this technology that has been invented 5 years ago, and we're going to pay them $30,000 a year. It's like, okay, that's not a skills gap. You're completely off in the market. First of all, nobody has 10 years of experience in that technology. It was literally invented 5 years ago. So your HR system is just like broken. And you're asking for somebody with 10 years of experience to be an entry level, not happening. Or they'll ask for somebody that's a principal level and they have 10 to 15 years of experience, and we're going to pay them $50,000. Like, not happening. Hell, most of these jobs are going for $130,000, $140,000, $150,000 a year for senior to principal level folks. You're not going to get somebody for $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year to do principal level security work. Not happening. So I'll start off by saying, yeah, I think there is a problem, but the larger cybersecurity gap discussion sometimes is more of a looking at the problem and the economics around it. I have a lot of people who are entry level people that want to find a job and have the hardest time in the world finding a job, because the expectations on an entry level job are not really entry level in this country, not for most companies. Now, on OT specifically, I would like to see a lot more IT people that work at infrastructure companies have some OT experience. I'd like to see some dedicated OT security personnel at those companies, just a couple. If you're in the business of pipelines, you should have somebody who understands pipeline security in your company. And we need more on the engineering side to understand some of the choices they make and the security costs that it bears. Good example, in Oldsmar, Florida, there was an attack at the beginning of this year where somebody broke in remotely and tried to poison the populace. They dumped like 11,000 times the normal rate of cyanide into the water system. They tried to. Luckily, it was caught. But somebody tried to hurt American citizens on American soil by targeting OT at a water facility. Now, how's that relate to engineering? Well, you're always going to be able to abuse systems. You can't engineer a perfect system, but that valve, that physical valve, probably didn't need to allow an opening that would result in 11,000 times the normal rate. You do have to dump cyanide in the water system every now and then. Like after a hurricane or something like that, just a little bit, surge, clean out the system, good to go. There's a normal amount. You need to surge every now and then. It's great. But is it 11,000 times? I don't think so. I don't know. I'm not a chemical engineer, but I don't think it is. So are there variants, and is there scenarios that we can literally engineer some of the risk out? There are. And if we teach our engineering folks and our operations folks the choices they can make that can reduce the impact of cyber attacks, that's good cybersecurity. It's not in the form of network analysis and standards and frameworks. It's just in the form of better engineering. And that's a fantastic addition to the problem as well. So I think it's across the whole stack, and we need to do a lot more. I think there's a lot being done, which is exciting. But top level, when we look at the security gap, I do think there's some things we have to explore as a community as well. Media shines a bright light on poster children such as JBS, Oldsmar, Colonial, but does this overshadow those organizations that are in fact making progress and securing their environments? Blame game versus collaborative, 1000% yes. So it is upsetting to me because we're a technology company, but we have an incident response team, and we get called into pretty much all the major OT incident response cases, and it's upsetting to see that the people who want to talk about incidents the most are the people that aren't in the incident, and they feel so free to run their mouth. And so your question's a little bit different. I'm going to answer your question too, but I want to make a point here too. We have a lot of folks in the community that like to be able to talk about incidents that they have no insights into, and you get a lot of bad information as a result. As an example, I still hear from people about Colonial, and now Colonial is one of our clients. They engaged us after the incident. So I'm only going to be speaking from what's public here, not in any way talking about their internal stuff. So my next statement is related specifically to what Joe prepared and talked about in his testimony. So in Colonial, there's a lot of people who still talk about how a billing system got taken down and Colonial shut down their pipeline because they weren't able to bill for the product. And that's not really true. It's not completely true. And it paints them in a light of, oh, they only shut down the pipeline because they couldn't make money. Look at those greedy pipeline people. That's not accurate. My understanding from public testimony, there was two major reasons they shut down the pipeline. One is because they didn't have visibility into OT, and they didn't know if the adversary was in the OT networks. And there was a real safety concern after getting attacked that somebody could do something on purpose or even accidental to cause a loss of human life. So Colonial made the decision for the purpose of safety against its own interest financially to shut down the pipeline. And that was amazing. The second reason, and I'm inferring here, and I'm not speaking from anything of their own internal systems, but billing systems and pipelines aren't just billing systems. A billing system also does tasking. And so if I want to know where one product in the pipeline is going and to what customer along the route, and when does the next product start and how much of it, and make sure I don't mix them too much and all that, that's the tasking system. And so if I lose the tasking system, I can't deliver product through a pipeline. And so it sounds like, oh, the billing system went down and look at those corporate greedy folks, when it's actually a safety and operations discussion. And so I think I think there's a lot of victim blaming that takes place, and usually it's pretty inaccurate. But to go back to your real question is, do we get in the blame game versus collaborative progress forward? Yes. For every one incident in the media, we're probably doing another 10 behind the scenes, and it stays out of the media. So the problem is bigger than people realize. But for every 10 we're doing, there's 20 companies that are doing really good security efforts and they're moving the needle forward. So I do think we have clickbait style awareness on the cybersecurity discussion, where there's a lot of good people doing good things and making good progress, and we should be celebrating them. But we get so focused on the train wrecks and the car wrecks, and it's like the fans of NASCAR that only watch for the racetrack crash, right? It's just, I don't think that's a healthy way to move our community forward. Are the majority of your investigations into IT breaches or OT? We only touch OT. So there are phenomenal firms out there on the enterprise IT side of the house. If you're calling Dragos, it's only got to do with OT. So the only ones we do are OT related. All right. I think I made it through all the questions. Anything more? I know we got some more time, but we can also return time back to you. But any other questions or thoughts or back and forth before I yield back the time? Related to the earlier question, how do you think stakeholders in OT security can encourage more talent to enter the space? Training, incentives, et cetera. Great. Really good question. When I think about workforce development, and I'm sure it's not so simple. But when I think about workforce development, I generally see people have three motivations beyond like family life and things like that. Number one is pay. Number two is an interesting mission and skill development. And number three is some level of career advancement, right? You're looking for that. And you don't have to be the best at all three. You can't only have one. And a lot of times when folks leave the organizations they're in, I mean, it might be a cultural thing in their management or so forth, but it usually relates to losing two out of the three. And so I would see this in government all the time where the generals would talk about, oh, we can't compete with the private sector pay. That's why we're losing people. I'm like, what? No, you're not. You're losing people because we have to do annual training every day. And we were told that we were going to be doing cyber operations. And now I'm patching servers in a corner or whatever. Like, and I have no idea where my next duty assignment is. You're not giving me any visibility into my career. So if I'm not going to have insight to my career and I'm not going to do a cool mission, I'm at least going to get paid well. So yeah, now I'm going to leave. And so I think too many folks over obsess about pay and they treat pay as if that's the driver. Pay is a driver, but it's not as much as people make it out to be. Usually it's about the mission and it's about the career advancement. So what can infrastructure owners do? Two things come to mind. There is some pay justification that you got to be in the ballpark, right? If you're paying $50,000 and the job pays $150,000, that's too far off. But you don't have to be the top paying place. The first thing I would do is realize what the mission is of that site. Are you an oil company? There's really cool oil operations, really cool operations that happen at refineries. Are you letting your security people actually get time in the refinery to go do all that? Or are you just putting them in a cubicle up in Houston and telling them that they got to stay there and look at network traffic? Well, they're not getting to experience the mission. Get them out in the field. Advertise on the mission. Hey, you're going to do these cool things and learn these cool things. And this is great. Oh, that's exciting. And then the career advancement piece, it's helping them get the training and certifications and all sorts of stuff that's going to help them advance their career. Those are expensive to pay for on your own. Companies usually get discounts. Hey, here's our path for you over the next 2 to 3 years. This is what I want you to be able to accomplish. This is the responsibilities you're going to be able to take on. Here's the training and things you're going to get. That's a compelling offer. And so I would lean a lot more on the mission of those companies because infrastructure companies are cool and you can leverage that. And then let's see, the next question was, who should be in charge of that, government, academia, or industry? In terms of training, I think everybody, and I know that's a kind of a BS answer for you, but I do think it's everybody. You get some of the best training happens at specialized training organizations. I still teach at the SANS Institute. I'll hold up with anybody and I'll debate with anybody. The SANS training is some of the best in the world, but they're like 5 and 6 day long classes. They're training. In other words, skills training on tools and technologies and tradecraft and things you want to do. Academia to me is not the place, and I'm not going to speak for the academics on the line, but academia is not the place for training. But academia is a wonderful place for research and learning how to ask proper questions and learning how to research proper questions and learning the theory and fundamental behind things. And can I really get into the theory and fundamentals behind computer science, even though I might go take a 5-day training class on a certain tool set that I'm going to go use? So I think academia provides that niche. And then I think government can provide opportunities where folks don't have opportunities. And so they can provide funding for academia and training to do more work in underserved areas. They can also look and say, wow, if you really wanted to go train to respond to an attack on infrastructure, it's not like you have a power grid in your basement either. Can the government build a national laboratory or national range that invites people in to go and partner with universities and be able to get hands-on experience on equipment and things that are difficult to achieve? So government has opportunities like that. And then I think that government also has the opportunity to do things at an awareness level. If the president of the United States comes out and says OT security is important, boardrooms are talking, as we've seen. If the DHS comes out and says, we really need you to get a focus on these 3 issues, people go learn about that. So there's an awareness part to the education as well that government can help with. And so I think everybody kind of has a role to play in that. The SolarWinds represent a new model of attack. It was not delivered using common methods like phishing, email, or vulnerability exploitation. It was a supply chain attack. So there have been a number of examples like SolarWinds before. Even the United States government has been accused of doing this, where we, according to public sources and media, compromised the certification authorities to do various supply chain level attacks before. Not only in things like Stuxnet, but also in a true encryption issue leveraged in the Flame operation in Iran. So anyway, I think it's particularly hypocritical, to be perfectly candid, when the United States comes out and goes, "Oh, SolarWinds, how dare you, Russia? I can't believe you do this. Crossed the line." And it's like, really? Like, we spy on people all the time. we compromise the supply chain all the time. Like that's not the argument to hang your hat on. The compromising of the OT infrastructure, destructive attacks, things like that, hang your hat on that. Espionage, states spy on each other all the time. And was the method of SolarWinds all that particularly worse than anything else we've seen before? No. However, there is an aspect of SolarWinds that was very concerning, and that was the indiscriminate nature. Because when supply chain attacks have happened before by other states, they've typically been fairly focused on who their target was. But SolarWinds and NotPetya with attack software in Ukraine back in 2017, they were completely indiscriminate. Anybody who had SolarWinds got compromised. Anybody who had that tax software, MEDOC, got compromised. And in any discussion of conflict and espionage under UN 2-4 and the various international conventions, cyber is not special and gets no special call out. But everybody generally agrees on the international level that indiscriminate attacks are inappropriate. And so I think that is an aspect that I would be hanging the hat on, hey, it was indiscriminate, and that's why it was a problem. In terms of supply chain compromises, yeah, it's happening. It's happening more and more. We're seeing more of it. Microsoft put out a bulletin earlier this week on a compromise of numerous suppliers. You can absolutely hang your hat on the fact that your suppliers are getting compromised as well. And we need to have open and honest dialogue about what that means and how to be resilient inside of that. And then Matt, I think you were gonna jump on and say something.
Oh, I'm good. Thanks.
Perfect. I saw you unmute, so I didn't know. All right, didn't mean to dime me out. Anyways, perfect. And all right, so from Neil, I think this is probably the last one. Then I'll I see your maybe the Oscar theme song playing for me here. Are there any technological developments related to OT security that you're excited about and think are promising? I'm going to give you the very boring answer, and it's just that people are doing it. And so I don't think we need next gen anything. Like we're a technology provider for network monitoring and stuff like that. And yeah, I'm excited about that. But like, honestly, if these companies are doing anything in OT security around like those 5 big controls that I talked about, I don't care to throw stones at what vendor they choose or what approach they choose. It's the fact that they're doing those things. So the most promising thing about OT security in the last couple of years is the fact that we're in the conversation now. People generally understand that OT security is worth doing and it's different than IT security. And we're seeing companies go and invest and make those changes. That's what's promising. That's what excites me. And we're seeing companies stand up publicly and say, we did it. Look at what we accomplished. Look at the successes we've had. And we're starting to get those stories that go and motivate and accelerate others to do the same. That is extremely promising. Anyways, all right, cool. I think that's good. All right, if you had something else.
I think that's good. Again, there are any other questions? You'd like to take questions? And how is your time constraint, Rob?
No, I'm good. I just don't want to keep people needlessly, but yeah, I've got time, so I'm happy to be flexible. Sounds like we might be wrapped up though. Yeah, go ahead.
So you talked about training, certain skills, training you can give in place like SANS, and in universities you give more like a sort of a conceptual, foundational sort of experience or training. I'm wondering still, so we have, for example, in our university, a unit which is which trains, when they give degree in industrial technology. So they teach all of these, industrial control systems.
Mhm.
But, and then of course we have a computer science where we have all of the computer science plus cybersecurity part. But there's still sort of a gap in communication on the two sides. So like I can go to ITech, I sort of see what they're doing, but I don't necessarily have the exposure of how they are applied in the field to understand the bigger picture of where attacks may be. And they don't have the exposure of even at the low level. So do you see any places in other academic environments where they are sort of creating programs that may be bridging these?
There's two that come to mind. And obviously I can't speak for the entirety of the academic community. I'm sure there's others, but the two places I'm seeing this happen a lot is at the University of Houston. They have Art Conklin down there. And so it wasn't really the University of Houston, it was Art. and he just like powered through of, we're building some ICS ranges, we're pulling this together. I'm pulling in the security side, I'm pulling in the engineering side. And he's got ICS security academic class there. But he will even argue that the disheartening thing is it's not as well taken advantage of as it probably should be. And then the other place that they're doing it is in, I think it's, I don't remember what university in Idaho. It might just be the University of Idaho, but in Idaho, they have a gentleman there that came out of Idaho National Labs and went to do intelligence work at private sector after, and then came back and built out an ICS security program. And because of the positioning of Idaho National Labs being there, they're getting a lot of support and access that helps make that easier. And I think that goes back to the topic of like where government can be helpful is when universities want to go do something that isn't in the market interest. If you pop open an ICS security class and academic environment, you're probably not going to make as much money as you could opening up a blockchain class. But the reality is there's a national and community interest in doing that. So shouldn't there be federal dollars to help support that? And I think that is where government can be facilitated there.
There's a question there.
Oh, yep. The national ranges one. Yep. So what national labs or government facilities have cyber test ranges? Where is some of the OT relevant research taking place? So they have them, but you can't really access them is part of the problem. So Idaho National Labs, Pacific Northwest National Labs, and Sandia all have really nice ICS ranges. And Idaho National Labs does put on a free class for people to come do a 5-day hands-on with their range, but it's extraordinarily scripted and there's not a lot of playing around you can do. And it doesn't run that often. And so it's not very accessible. It's like a long waiting list. But that's where they exist. We don't really have national test ranges and similar. We should, but usually what happens is these grant programs happen. And it's like, I want to take $10 million and the first 5 million is going to stand up this range across 2 years. And then we're going to do our experiment and then we're going to reach the conclusion. And there's never money to sustain the range we've already built. So then they just go to the wayside. And so we've had that problem consistently in the academic and government communities. And this is my very biased perspective, but some of the best OT relevant research is taking place in private sector companies, which is not necessarily the societal good that we want. But that is what's happening. As an example, if I want to go work on certain types of infectious diseases, the best place for me to go is probably Johns Hopkins or maybe the university, maybe Oxford University. Like we can do some really good work there. And I'm going to work with some of the best in the world with some of the best access and some of the best resources. And man, that's where I'm going to go. If you're going to do OT security research today, that is not generally found commonly across academic or training communities. You're going to go to a high-end ICS security company who's investing in doing all this research. And a great example, and this isn't a pitch for us, but just the dichotomy here at Dragos, we've got $4 or $5 million worth of ranges that we have operating at any given time for our own testing and training and research purposes. That's hard to replicate in most places. Like I have a better range at Dragos in Maryland than I do at Idaho National Labs. That's kind of crazy. But that's the state of ICS security today. It's in the company-led research being shared, yeah, quite a bit. And so most of your companies will put out insights that they get out of their research, maybe not the tool development stuff, but like every year we release the year in review reports in February, which is like all of our insights into threats and vulnerabilities and everything else. Most companies will do something similar. Awesome.
Folks, I sent out an announcement earlier. I want to post it again if I still have my URL there. Okay. If you want to join our mailing list, CCIC mailing list, please visit the site on the left column. You'd find join us or something to that effect. And we barely send any information on that list, but when we do, it will be for events like we just have here. So if you want to join us, please do that. And with that, I'm going to leave it for James and Jim and Matt at this point.
Great. Thanks, Arun. Thanks everyone for attending. Rob, especially want to thank you and Dragos for your time and sharing your expertise, your thoughts around critical infrastructure, OT and cyber protection. I think it was very eye-opening. Again, just want to thank our sponsors that have helped put on all the seminars this week, the Center for Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity, the Louisiana Business Emergency Operations Center, Lafayette Consolidated Government, our UL Information Technology, and our Small Business Development Center, Louisiana PTech, as well as the Port of South Louisiana and InfraGard, Louisiana. So Arun, in your intro, you kind of highlighted the critical infrastructure risks facing us, particularly along our corridor here around I-10 in South Louisiana and the Gulf Coast. And I think, Rob, you did a great job of, giving us some background and highlighted approaches as well as policies, for us to consider as we work together, secure our nation's critical infrastructure. I thought the questions during the Q&A session were great. So thanks to everyone for their participation. I think all of us have a much improved view on how we may move forward in securing OT. So I think a short follow-up survey will be sent out to everybody who participated. So take the time to respond. It will be short, but it helps us improve on our offerings that we do. They're not often, but we try to do our best to share the information we have and to try to overall up-level our cybersecurity approaches and talents. So please respond. And again, I think you all saw the link that you can sign up for the mailing list. So thanks again. If there's no other questions or comments, Arun?
I have a quick comment. This is Alan Rourke. I want to apologize for Rob. Us from Louisiana know that Dragos is a restaurant in New Orleans.
Yeah.
And Ridgeland, Mississippi. I didn't realize until
I'm from Alabama. I knew what I got into.
Thanks. That was a great meeting.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah. So thanks.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you, Rob. We appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thanks. Take care.